Welcome to Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don. I'm a consultant in life sciences, and I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. This week, my guest is Cristina Varner. Christine is the National Life Science and Digital Health and Telemedicine Practice Leader for Newfront. She supports the risk management needs of biotech, medical device, pharmaceutical, diagnostic, digital health, and telemedicine companies from early stage on up. So with that, welcome, Christine.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And so could you just tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, when you were announcing what I do, I was like, wow, do I really do all that? Anyway, yeah, a little about myself. I'm actually someone who is very focused on fashion. My college degree, when I went to college, I majored in fashion merchandising. The intent was to become a fashion buyer, but I graduated during a recession and opportunities in fashion were tough to come by. So I had to pivot, and I happened to be the daughter of a former, now retired risk manager. And my father also was his own insurance agency owner in the latter part of his career. And what do we always say? You never want to do what your parents are doing, right? And I thought my dad, I thought it's the most boring career ever, and there's no way I'm doing insurance. And then lo and behold, he said, hey, insurance is great opportunities for you. You want a challenge. You've always worked really hard. Why don't you consider, coming and working with me for a while and seeing if you like it, and maybe you want to take over my agency someday. So during the last 5 years of his career, I worked with him. I'll say right now, there's no way in hell that I would take over his agency. He literally worked 7 days a week, and I thought there's no work-life balance there. But I really liked insurance. And so I pivoted to the retail brokerage side. I came first to ABD Insurance. We were, and I'll explain that more in a minute, but we were a full service brokerage, primarily based in Silicon Valley. We were very well known in the West. And I worked primarily with technology companies, which was really exciting at the time. When I joined, was during the height of the market. I saw a lot of companies go bang and then boom and then died, and I saw it all. But over time, that became less challenging for me, so I sought out some other opportunities. And then ABD approached me a few years later and said, we're looking to build a life science practice. Would you be interested in building it? We know you like to own something and you want a challenge. And I had no idea what life science even was. I never worked with life science companies, but I said, sure. And the rest is history. And I became very passionate about this space. And my clients are very passionate. So I love it. So that's where I came to be today. And then in the last couple of years, I started to focus on digital health and telemedicine because a lot of our life science buyers started, some of them left life science and migrated over that side, and they came back to us for insurance. And so we decided to build a vertical around that as well. So that's currently what I'm involved in.
Well, it's so interesting, though. I mean, there are a couple of things that I've lived through as well, right? Some really tough economic times, in my career. I know whenever I first graduated from school, it was a similar kind of story. I mean, a drastic economic downturn essentially laid off all of the people that were, working on, anything having to do with defense spending and things like that. My very first degree was in laser physics, so most of us were going to wind up somewhere in defense. And it redirected my career, which then put me back in healthcare. So similar sort of parallel from that standpoint. But, then also a few years later, I found myself in this position of somebody had said, well, hey, we need a quality leader. We're not going to hire somebody. Why don't you go do quality for a while? And my dad's entire career was quality. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So, yes, I can understand several elements of your story as well directly.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
funny.
So can you tell us just a little bit about, I mean, you spent 18 years, more or less, if LinkedIn is correct. I found a few times that LinkedIn is not exactly, spot on, but I mean, your career has kind of, left you to this point inside of life sciences. And then what made you transition, to Newfront?
Great question. So actually, Newfront sort of found me as we were kind of chatting earlier. In 2021, ABD Insurance merged with Newfront. I had never heard of Newfront, so it was news to me. Typically, we know who our competitors are, but turns out they really weren't a direct competitor of ours. We like to think of ourselves, the reason we merge is because it's bringing two different companies that really have a lot more strength together. Newfront is very technology focused and very innovation driven, and ABD was as well. But we spent most of our time really focused on our expertise. And I think that's what we're known for, is having industry verticals and having subject matter experts in-house. And Newfront, legacy Newfront, was really focused on innovation. And so now we've merged the two together, and it's been really exciting to have access to tools and to continue to create tools that really are a game changer in insurance, because I think everyone knows that insurance is very slow to change. And we're especially, probably because of coming from Silicon Valley, we really are focused on change. I always used to say, when I wanted certain things to happen, I'd go, wow, I could probably hire someone in high school to do this, because in the Valley, that's a lot of what you see. It's just young people doing amazing things. And I thought, why in insurance can't we get this done differently? And so now what's so exciting is that Newfront, we're doing that. And so it's that's what's brought me here today.
That is great. I mean, so can you tell me a little bit more about sort of what does it look like? What do products look like and things like that from Newfront for life science companies? What does that look like? Because as I was researching it, I was like, I didn't know that this existed, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, so that's a great question. So I get asked all the time, if sometimes people literally don't know what life science is. I can't believe that, but they don't. And then if I say that I manage clinical trials, for example, insurance for clinical trials, they're like, "Oh, there's insurance for clinical trials?" And it's like, of course, because there's a lot of risk with clinical trials. And so that is obviously, for our teams, probably the predominant exposure is the clinical trials. I would say about 90% of our life science clients are in active trials today, and that's generally all over the world. So very little recruitment is in the US anymore. It's typically mostly overseas. So we spend a lot of time with clinical trials, and then a lot of the other coverages that you probably already aware of: workers' comp, cyber liability, all the property casualty coverages, cargo, stock throughput, etc. I think the largest exposure for life science companies, besides foreign clinical trials or clinical trials, is their product liability, because anything that results in bodily injury because of their product or their trials, that's a huge exposure for these companies. So that's probably where we spend a lot of our time. But then beyond that, we are a full service brokerage. So, if they need directors and officers liability, retirement services, employee benefits, and such, we also have different teams that manage those. And most of our clients do have our foot in different teams within our organization. So that's great to see as well. But generally speaking, that's where what we're doing for them. And clinical trials, like I said, just is probably the biggest area for them.
And how do you normally get engaged then? So is it normally the company that is recruiting patients, or the actual company that's running the clinical trial?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so both. So we do probably work mostly with the manufacturers or the sponsors of the trial. the manufacturers of the drug or the device. And
Yeah.
then we also have contract research organizations that are clients as well, the CROs that actually run trials on their behalf. So we have a number of them as clients, and they have different risks, but they are closely associated, but different, and different exposures. So I would say that's that's primarily, yeah, I think though that I think we do this, we work with sponsors predominantly because that's just more commonplace. CROs, you may or may not know, there's been a lot of M&A, and so a lot of smaller CROs have rolled into larger ones, so there's not as many out in the marketplace as there used to be. There's not as much competition there, but so we're predominantly working with the sponsors to procure the insurance for them.
That's interesting. And then if I were to think about the different phases of clinical trials, so are you involved only whenever they get to human clinical trials, or do I'm assuming that that's primarily where your involvement starts. But that, I mean, again, I'm just trying to clarify in case anybody in the audience. I have a lot of people I know that running clinical trials, and this may be new for them as well. Who knows?
Right. And actually we work with both. We have a separate team called the Emerging Risk Unit, and that team actually does work with the much earlier stage venture backed companies that might be just be purely in R&D. They might be like working with only animals, like in a vivarium. They may just be dealing with no human trials yet. So that we typically wouldn't be engaging with them at that stage. The Emerging Risk Unit is trained to work with those companies. And as they grow, and they do start with their phase 1, 2, 3 studies, then that's where we engage them at that point. So,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that really helps to clarify it, because I think the again, I've observed a lot of these, and I would imagine there's somebody sitting around inside of the company saying, hey, we should have insurance for this, and I am not normally involved there. Normally, I would imagine most of the legal team is controlling a lot of this in most cases.
Yeah. And I think they come, it comes various ways, right? Some venture capitalists know, we know well, and they'll say, hey, this is probably the point where you should start to engage with an insurance broker. They might be advising a client of theirs who then becomes a client of ours. We've done that many times. I actually remember pre-pandemic quite often going to a VC's office. That just seems such a long time ago now, and we would sit in a room with a very early stage company and walking them through sort of next steps with insurance because it was so new for them. And they might say, and it usually again starts with a clinical trial. It's usually, oh, we're about to go into Australia. We don't know anything about Australia. Can you talk to us about how we can properly protect ourselves? But also, it's obviously required in order to conduct a trial to have insurance. I'm not sure that's obvious for everyone, but it is definitely a requirement. And so those days don't happen anymore. And now everything's done over the phone or Zoom. But I remember those days well. And the venture capitalists are usually the first that they reach out to. Is like, what broker do you know that can help us? So it was great.
And that was going to be my next question. So if you are not venture backed, I guess, do you have anybody that then involves your company? And then if so, how do they get kind of tied in with Newfront?
It's the same, actually, Dawn. It's just that there's a team that we call the small business unit instead of the emerging risk unit. It's a small business unit where they are working with companies that are not venture backed. So I think where we differentiate against very large sort of global brokers is that we are willing to work and incubate these companies along their trajectory. We've had an immense amount of success over the years, working from companies from early stage all the way up until they go public and then become very large. And that's been really exciting to see. And not every broker wants to dedicate the resources to do that. And so we pretty much don't, we don't discriminate in that way. It's if you are life science, um, especially, we do want to work with you.
Great. And what are some of the biggest challenges that you face at Newfront?
Well, I was thinking about this question and I was thinking to myself, this might sound cliche, but the biggest challenge really is change. Because since merging with Newfront, it's been a very dramatic shift in terms of Newfront is truly sort of a technology platform type company. And if you've worked with technology companies, you know that they tend to move very fast. They want to break things, they want to fail fast, all the sort of things you hear about in the Valley. And then insurance, we're like, no, you have to slow way down. So even though they were doing insurance before, they were heavily tech focused. We're more heavily insurance focused. And we are risk managers, so to speak, outsourced risk managers for our clients. So change has been difficult, but what I keep telling my teams is we wanted this type of change. We just have to sort of meet in the middle and remember that the outcome is ultimately going to be what we want, which is better tools, better ways of operating and doing business, because we do it very differently than a traditional brokerage. And I think that's very difficult, but it's exciting in the end.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I mean, as much as I'd like to move fast in life sciences as well, I mean, there's a lot of reassurance that we've got to have as well that we're not going to, hurt people along the way. So it's I understand the technology side, but I also, I mean, we saw kind of a bad player in this with Theranos, right, a couple of years ago, and so. I think everybody sort of worries again about, that element of it, but at the same time, you're right. I don't know that insurance and healthcare are all that far apart from each other because most people are skeptical and wanting to move slower inside of this industry as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed. Agreed.
And where do you see some of the biggest opportunities are?
I think it really is the technology and also technical expertise. So I think the opportunities at Newfront to forge both of these together has really been huge. I've actually never seen anything like it before. So, one of the areas that, like I mentioned before, we focus heavily on clinical trials. Um, and we have a portal that is electronic. It is proprietary that we developed many years ago and we've iterated over time. In fact, early this month, we came out with the latest version. And most of our competitors do not have a platform like this. And what it affords our clients is the ability to go into a portal and be able to quickly, it's an interactive country map. They can quickly discern what's required in a specific country for insurance. They can upload the documents in the portal and then they can get a quote in usually 24 to 48 hours. Historically, all of that's done by email. It's like what's required in South Korea, then you send them an email back, and then you go back and forth. And when we've met with large life science companies, it's always been interesting for me to hear the risk manager. You think they're going to come in with a big pain point, like, oh, I mean, I don't know what I can't think of one off the top of my head, but something much larger than clinical trials. And they usually say, oh, the biggest problem I have is clinical trials. And why do you have the problem? Well, it's because everything lands on my desk and I don't know anything about clinical trials and I don't want to have to deal with this all day long. So they want to see the portal. They want to understand, how is this going to make my life easier? It's accessible 24/7 from anywhere in the world. That's important because clinical trial personnel are all over the world. They are usually the individuals that are making the submissions, not an insurance person, not a risk manager, not a CFO. So it is a very unique portal. But without the technology and the technical expertise, this can't be successful. So I think we are going to continue to have even a greater advantage now that it's with Newfront's um, innovation. I think we're just going to see more and more tools that we can provide our clients that will hopefully make their lives easier.
Yeah, and I've been in the room before too, where companies have decided or are in the process of deciding, hey, look, we'd like to move our clinical trial from here to there because of some strategic importance, right? And you don't want those decisions to take forever either. And understanding this sounds like it'd be absolutely critical on for a lot of parts of the organization as they're considering where are we going to go next.
Yes, absolutely.
So there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. Cristina, what inspires you?
So, what inspires me is really the younger generation. Like, I watch my teams, almost all of the individuals on the teams are younger than me. And they inspire me every day because they are risk management professionals and they focus in a very difficult area, life science. And they come up with new ideas all the time, and they are also willing to work really hard but also wanting to take time for themselves. I have never been good at taking time for myself, so I learn a lot from them about, gosh, Christina, you're not saving the rainforest. Like, you can take a breath. And they show me how they can work hard and play hard, and I just learn from them all the time, and I'm so invigorated because when I was their age, I just felt like I couldn't do that. If I slow down just a little bit, I'm going to lose my momentum. And they are showing me that they can be successful in an area that is pretty difficult, and still find the time to do something for themselves and to have some more a little more balance in their life, I guess. So,
Well, thank you for sharing that. And what concerns you?
uh, DE&I concerns me. Diversity, equity, inclusion. I happen to be the co-founder of our Women's Employee Resource Group, and I'm also part of our DE&I Council. And I don't think it's a secret that women, especially women in the financial services sector, are still underrepresented quite a bit, especially in the C-suite. And I have always been really passionate about paying it forward to the younger generation of women that hope that they can see strong women succeed, but without giving up so much and without having the imposter syndrome and having a support system. I always say that, people would say, oh, mentors, mentors, mentors. But I always would say, no, I think it's more about sponsors, sponsors, sponsors. So I tell women that work with me, I always say, you should be concerned about who is talking about you when you're not in the room. And it's important to find an ally, especially further up the food chain in an organization that really believes in you and is willing to support you when you're not in that room. And because it's not moving fast enough, and I'm not a patient person. I'm trying to be, but I think I'm just going to continue fighting the fight. But that is definitely an area that concerns me.
So one of the things that you wouldn't know about me was, and anybody that listens to this episode that's worked with me in the past knows this very well. So whenever I was with General Electric, kind of towards the end of my career with them, I happened to sort of be talking to one of the individuals that was in one of these groups, and he had just said to me, look, it's important that people at all levels in the organization are involved in this, kind of for the same exact reason, that you're saying, that look, it's important that you could be somebody that's not a part of one of these inclusion groups and essentially help support those groups, by sponsoring people, by making sure that their voice is heard. Um, I then very much got to pay that forward whenever I went to Becton Dickinson. Their women's group had more or less stalled, but the person that was responsible for that group was in my department. And so we had several meetings. What does it take to actually get momentum back behind this group and get things moving forward? This is important. We need to make sure that it happens. And then we actually had, one of the biggest events to re-kick off, those sessions inside of Becton Dickinson while I was there. And I was extremely proud at the fact that not only did the momentum in the women's group carry through for the women, it then kicked off the veterans group and the LGBTQ group and all the others. I mean, it just had this chain effect inside of the organization. So it is absolutely critical and something to be concerned about for sure.
Yeah, I love hearing that. We have several different ERGs as well, and I think I love hearing that from a man, especially too. It's great that you're an ally. That's great.
Well, I was made fun of at one point. I should bring this through as well. So I was essentially, there were two men standing at the front of the room saying, "Hey, look, we're going to make the women's initiative group inside of Becton Dickinson, big and powerful, and something that people can be proud of." And there were two women sitting in the front row that were executives in the company, and they had said, "Hey, look, isn't it funny that two men are standing here?" And my comment back was, look, I only took this on because this group had stalled.
Right.
This opportunity was here for two executives as well. And they took that challenge and then decided that they would help some of the other groups as well. So to me, it was kind of one of those moments where it was a bit of the executive challenge to this isn't just for me. This is really realistically, this is for everybody inside of the organization. It was great to see it
Yeah,
move forward. So,
that's great to hear. You lit a fire.
yeah. And then lastly, Christina, what excites you?
What excites me? I know, okay, you're gonna think this is funny because we're on a podcast, but I love podcasts, and I thought back to what's the very first podcast I listened to, and it was with Tim Ferriss, which I'm sure you know
Uh-huh.
Tim Ferriss, right?
Yes. Yep.
And he always had an extraordinary like roster of guests, and I remember thinking, wow, why did I never listen to these before? Because you learn so much in a compressed period of time, and I can listen to it while I drive. Now when I drive, I never even listen to music anymore. Now when I drive, I listen to podcasts. If I'm walking my dogs, I listen to podcasts. I think, how amazing is this platform? And I share podcasts all the time, and I encourage my friends listen to this podcast. So I just think it's so ironic that I'm now on a podcast because I have loved them for so long. And it's so great. It's just a really great platform, and kudos to you, because I don't think I could ever have my own podcast, and I know it takes up probably a ton of work, but I love them. So that's where I'm at on that. So
So I mean, it's actually funny that you bring that up. So I was asked about 2 months ago to write an article about the importance of having B2B podcasts, because there are plenty of podcasts that sort of are like consumer to consumer or business to consumer kind of podcasts that are out there, but business to business just isn't something that there's a lot of today. And so I wrote the article. It's due to come out in the next few weeks. But then in addition to that, I decided, why don't I just build a checklist and a training class and things like that. So I recently finished those things. So people that listen here will hear more, I'm sure, about that as well. But I'm a massive consumer of podcasts myself. And it's funny because without the ability to sort of listen fast, I think my life would be, I wouldn't be able to get through as many episodes. And so, anywhere between 1.8 and 2 times speed, I can get through
oh, that's
podcasts pretty quickly. So, but
I can do
everybody
one and
talks
a half.
fast and they never sound the same to me.
Yeah, that's so funny. I can do one and a half is the max. That's fast. That's fast what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and especially as slow as I talk. I know that I talk slow as well, but I mean, I can listen a little quicker. So, yeah.
That's funny.
I agree with you. Podcasts are a great way to stay connected. I did want to sort of give you an opportunity here at the end. We will have, so in the show notes and things like that, we will have all the links to get to you. But beforehand, if people want to find out, much more about Newfront, where would they go to find out more?
They can go to our website. At, it's, I think, newfront.com. I'm hesitating because I'm not used to going to our website, and I'm like, do I have that right? I think so. I think I have that right. So we are Newfront Insurance. Typically, we just go by Newfront, so it should be newfront.com. But
It is.
it
It is.
highlights everything. Okay, good to know. So that's probably the best place, and there, it has. I know that it has, contact information on there, so that's probably where the best place to start.
And there were nice sections that I did my research as well that kind of guided me towards life science,
Yes,
and you could find out more about the clinical trial elements we talked about earlier and things like that. And so for people that do have questions, that would be where you would go. But again, Christina's page for the podcast, whenever it's published on the audio version is published, it will have all the links and things like that for people that are interested as well.
great.
So with that, Cristina Varner, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and sharing everything with us about Newfront.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thanks a lot.